Crime definitely on a weekend sometimes feels like a runaway train.
Speaking about runaway trains, an election date for local government elections has not been called as yet, only because it's just been about, it's actually not been a complete 24 hours since the Privy Council in the United Kingdom gave its ruling 3-2 in terms of law lords voting against the government's decision to postpone the term of aldermen and councillors for an extra year. Now, there's been a heavy public debate with all political voices being heard, whether it be from Philip Edward Alexander to Gary Griffith to, of course, Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, members on the opposition bench. And the individual who we heard most from with regards to the current administration responding to this ruling is the Attorney General Reginald Moore, which we'll get into in a moment. But guess what, Sean? I think we've made the argument when the government made the decision that, listen, this does not sound right. Even with the legislation they were bringing to Parliament, here on Talking Point, we said, and I think even Kemuel Pascal was with us at that time, we made the argument, listen, this is absolutely wrong, and the only reason why they were probably doing it is because they needed more time to get things done, possibly because they need to swing the vote following 7-7 3 years earlier.
I have a theory, and my theory is based on a combination of analyzing things we've observed before all of this, so regardless of this Privy Council ruling, but also with regards to how the AG responded. I have a theory, so I'm going to save that theory for later, but I think the key point is we conceded the fact that, look, if it passed in Parliament, this is legislation that passed in Parliament, right? It probably is technically legal. But we had an issue with regards to, is this ethical? Because they were voted in for 3 years, and it's been past 3 years. But more on what the AG had to say, because he had an interesting explanation on one of the daily papers. In a way, Daily Newsday says AG claims victory in Privy Council local government ruling. It does.
I'm just saying.
It does.
No.
I'm not sure if it's fair.
No,
but
it's not fair, because I'll tell you what, it's the same Newsday that said the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 pandemic as over.
Anyway, but to be fair to the Newsday, the AG was trying to defend the government's position even after the ruling. It was interesting to see. So before I tell you what it was like, why don't you watch it for yourself? Let's run the clip.
The Privy Council today has ruled that these amendments did not apply to the incumbent councillors and aldermen. By so finding, the 3 judges in the majority disagreed with the views of the other 5 appeal judges, Lord Briggs and Lord Kitchen of the Privy Council in the minority, and the unanimous Court of Appeal decision of Trinidad and Tobago by Mrs. Justices of Appeal Musai, Lucky and Aboud. All of the judges who have heard this matter have rejected the argument that there occurred any breach of the Constitution or of any common law right to vote. The Privy Council, in agreement with the unanimous Court of Appeal decision of Trinidad and Tobago that a change in the length of the incumbent councillors' terms of office cannot amount to a contravention of the Constitution. More than this, the majority of the Privy Council expressly recognized that it was the prerogative of, and I quote, and within the legislative competence of Parliament, paragraph 35 of the judgment, to so extend the term of incumbent councillors, providing sufficiently clear language was used. The only point of difference between the majority ruling and that of the other judges is to the clarity of the language used. The reasoning of the majority was merely that the amendments which were made, quote, more naturally read as applying to councillors and aldermen elected after the amendments came into force. This interpretation, however, was expressly disagreed with by the 5 other judges who have heard this matter. The Court of Appeal ruled on what it regarded as the plain meaning of Section 11.4 of the Municipal Corporations Act, and went on to find unanimously that, quote, "This court is of the view that the language of the amendments was sufficient to reveal the intent of Parliament." The majority of the Privy Council at paragraph 28 of their ruling stated, and I quote, "The board does not, however, go as far as to say that the Court of Appeal's reading of the amended sections is not a possible reading. The board accepts that there is a degree of ambiguity if the focus is solely on the language of the proper approach to construction. That is not, however, the proper approach to the construction, nor, to be fair to the Court of Appeal, did they suggest that it was. The court must have regard to the context and purposes of the amendment and the relevant principles and presumptions of statutory construction. Any issue of interpretation of legislation, therefore, and these are my words, remains a question of degree and impression, which the distinctly differing views of 8 members of our higher judiciary who have heard this matter profoundly illustrates. Nevertheless, as a responsible government, this government accepts this ruling of the majority of the board, which disagreed with the unanimous Court of Appeal decision and referred to its interpretation of the amendments as applying as it did to the incumbents. I emphasize here today, ladies and gentlemen, that the amendments to the Municipal Corporation Act have been designed to improve the legislative enabling framework within which local government will be implemented for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that nothing in the way of these amendments and nothing in the decision of the Privy Council can support any argument that this government, by these amendments, was seeking to disenfranchise the rights of the citizens of this country to vote their elected representatives into office. I emphasize this because this decision is, of course, one with an undoubted political dimension, and there will be those who will seek to misrepresent the decision that was handed down today in order to make political capital out of that decision. I suggest with respect, and I caution, that any misrepresentation of this judgment will be wrongly a misrepresentation that can border on contempt. So I urge all citizens to take the time to read this judgment carefully.
So that was our Attorney General giving his arguments with regards to what he feels is the reality or the practical reality of the situation. He does a very successful job, Ketan, acting as the government's advocate. And I would say the government's advocate and not the state's advocate in this case, because he is defending the position on legislature passed by Parliament. I do believe it was a simple majority. I don't think the opposition voted with the government to pass this. So he is defending that position. And on a technical level, I actually can't fault him per se for that on a technical level. As a legal defense lawyer, I don't know if I necessarily agree with him with regards to the AG being the state's lawyer that represents the interests of the people.
The government is the state, and therefore he's also speaking on behalf of the state. If you want to separate TNG from the state in terms of ideology and theory, we'll have that debate another time. However, I will not fault the Attorney General because the Attorney General is simply doing his job. And he's trying to put the best spin as possible on this ruling. Because bear in mind, after suggesting all of which he did and stating his opinions based off of the judgment, he says, as a responsible government, we will accept this ruling. So even after everything he said, he still has to accept the ruling. So you can put the best spin as possible on it. The Privy Council has ruled against the government, and that is what we will take away from it. However, let me just say, and I've said it again previously, I'll say it one more time. Reginald Moore, I think, in my opinion, he's a good lawyer.
Yep.
even with all the nonsense that transpired in the beginning with regard to what was taking place in the courts in the United States, I said I think he's a good lawyer. However, he's just not a great politician. But in this particular instance, he's proving that he is doing his job. He's doing it to the best of his ability. And kudos to him. At the end of the day, it doesn't change the judgment. It doesn't change the ruling. And it's now up to the Prime Minister, in consultation with the Cabinet, to now decide when we're going to hold local government elections.
So if the people, because, you know, an election is every 5 years, if the people has an issue with a position of the government, who is their legal representation? Not the government?
No. In this particular instance, you had those who were very much disenfranchised with government's decision. Who represented them at the Privy Council? Not the Attorney General.
All right.
You know, so there are avenues that exist for citizens, and whether it be in the majority or the minority, to actually take up issue with the government. Those avenues do exist, and in this particular instance, such example was used as the avenue.
Yes, he's doing his job, but I still think he's not doing his complete job. There's a political dimension to his job. And to some extent, I do wonder, how is it that the court could hold the media in contempt if the media has different political analysis to him? As much as he might want to say this is a legal analysis, this, you know, there is a gray area where those two things overlap, and the law is the law, but the politics.
The media, my interpretation of that is that the Attorney General is just trying to politicize the media, because we've seen attacks towards the media come from the Prime Minister previously, and in some instances from the opposition as well. We've witnessed that, so let's just be fair. What I will take from the Attorney General, and perhaps, I don't know if that was the best possible way to put it across, is that he's suggesting, do not go and interpret a judgment that was laid in the Privy Council and then skew it in your own way or your own fashion. Do not do such. Use the facts that were stated in the judgment as the base for your story. Do not interpret the judgment, right? And I think that is what he was trying to say. However, the way it came across on his part, in his communication, it seems as though it could be seen as a threat, or it could be seen as him trying to politicize the media.
I won't say a threat per se, because he's not. But I understand why you say that.
And that is the thing about it, because using the term threat comes with legal implications as well.
Yeah.
So you have to be very cautious with that. So it's a good point that you raised. Let me rescind that comment and say he was just cautioning the media.
No, but I understand why you said threat, and I think that the line of thinking is not necessarily wrong.